All right, let's finally talk about all of the games that I got to play at Summer Game Fest Play Days, which is the media event that happens right after the showcase and live stream presentation. Media gets to go to this campus essentially where a bunch of developers set up, and we get to make appointments, try out various games. Phantom Blade Zero was one that I was really looking forward to check out, and I did manage to play it early, and I definitely want to talk about that one. But alongside that, I played like a bunch of other games such as Replaced, Astro Bot, Skate Story, Neva, the Plucky Squire, Fatal Fury, Hyperlight Breaker, Lego Horizons, Kunitsu-Gami, Death Sprint 66, Battle Aces, Fear the Spotlight, and I saw presentations for Monster Hunter Wilds and Dragon Age Veilguard. So I'm going to talk all about that in this video. I want to start with Phantom Blade Zero because that's probably the one that interests me most as a Sekiro fan. Sekiro is still my favorite FromSoft game, and it's the first FromSoft game that I ever beat. I would like to think of myself as a connoisseur of parry-based mechanics, and Phantom Blade Zero definitely leans into a more Sekiro-like playstyle. It is a Souls-like. I would say it's more generous than Sekiro. So, for example, when you attack enemies, you will get pulled towards them, and then the combos themselves are very fast-paced. It's less sort of methodical than Sekiro is. You've got combinations of light and heavy attacks that you can execute, you can block, and then based on certain cues like lights that will appear before a certain attack, you'll have to parry or dodge. So if it's a blue light and you parry at just the right time, you will essentially do a perfect parry and kind of essentially sneak behind the enemy. And same thing with red lights. If you dodge at just the right time, you'll dash behind them in backstab position, and that'll allow you to do significant damage and also break their posture. Posture is a big part of this game. There's this meter that you have to deplete either by relentlessly attacking them or by parrying their attacks. When you do, they'll get staggered and you can do massive damage with combos. And that's sort of the whole gameplay loop that they focus on. And you've got finishing moves with triangle, which is also very Sekiro-esque. And then alongside that, you've got an ultimate attack that you can execute. So if you're doing well in combat, essentially your weapons will charge up and eventually you'll get an indicator that your ultimate attack is ready. And if you know how to use that at the right time, right after you break their posture, you can do a huge amount of damage. And there's this great ebb and flow to combat that makes it feel pretty good, in large part because the combat looks so freaking cool. Like the animations of Chinese martial arts and how fast-paced it is. There's nothing quite like this, I feel, in a Souls-like kind of experience, or in this case, a Sekiro kind of experience. Everything just looks so fluid and connects so well, and everything just looks really impactful, and they just put a lot of work into making the martial arts aspect of this game look really authentic, and the player combined with the enemies and the way they're engaging with each other look very connected and present. You've also got some ranged weapons like a bow and arrow and this like hand cannon that you can charge up that you can use and deploy when it's convenient. There are also some stealth elements. You can do stealth takedowns if you so desire. This demo comprised of a tutorial section where you fought this enemy and they kind of essentially broke down the controls and all of the different offensive and defensive maneuvers. You've got this next stage where you fought some ads and then a boss, and then there was a second boss followed by a third boss, and that was kind of my experience with the demo. I booked 20 minutes for this and I ended up only using like less than 10 minutes of it. But yeah, once you get into combat, I feel like it's not very hard to very quickly pick up, and the key here with combat is just to stay on the enemy and attack relentlessly, and then watch out for those cues that tell you to dodge at the right time or parry at the right time, or obviously block when you have to, but mainly you want to stay on their asses and really just unleash a barrage of attacks, and it felt really good to do because of how good those animations looked. I'd say the third boss was a bit trickier, and I died to that third boss a few times. He had this like ball and chain weapon that had a good amount of range. The attack patterns were a little bit trickier, and he had this one particular sort of one-shot kill move that if you get caught by, you essentially just die. But I managed to figure out that you can stop that by using a ranged attack like the hand cannon charged up and stuff like that. And so once I figured that out, I managed to make quick work of him, just kind of stayed on him, parried, blocked, and parried well enough where I just got all of those kind of perfect parry rewards, and also built up the posture meter enough where the enemy could eventually let their guard down completely, at which point I could unleash those barrage of attacks that would very quickly deplete their life. And I found just the gameplay pacing to be very vicious and satisfying. I'm curious to see how the difficulty of this game will ramp up over time, how intricate and complex the enemy attack patterns will get, and just how well designed those enemies' movesets are, so that it really does kind of make you have to get skilled, and you do feel that sense of reward. And hopefully they find a good balance of difficulty and make the bosses just look really epic and give us some real fantastic spectacles. Though spectacle is one area where it feels like this game won't be lacking in, based on this demo that I played and the numerous marketing materials that I've seen for it. So honestly, Phantom Blade Zero is looking pretty sick so far. I think for Soulsborne fans, it's gonna play familiar enough, but then it has its own unique elements and mechanics going for it that makes it stand out, and just aesthetically, it definitely does stand out, especially where its animations are concerned, and some people might enjoy the sort of more faster-paced style of combat, where it just feels like nothing ever really stops. It's not about being methodical, it's about going in there and being ferocious while being careful and being on the lookout for enemy attacks that you have to be able to sort of react to. But once you master that, it really just, you feel quite badass, which is kind of what you want with these types of games. So that's Phantom Blade Zero, ladies and gentlemen. Next up, we got Replaced, which is this indie-esque sort of cyberpunk side-scroller with an art style that is almost like Octopath Traveler-esque or Triangle Strategy-esque. It's got that 2.5D pixelated look, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The cinematography and the camera work that they use here for a 2.5D style of experience, like, it's just really cool how cinematic this game looks. It's a bit like games like Inside, where it is an adventure that takes place within a 2D plane mostly, but then you get to these sections where you're in this hub area. So, for example, there was this station where I got to go around and see the hustle and bustle of the denizens of this area, talk to NPCs, and explore and progress through the story that way. That definitely the narrative is taking a spotlight in this title, but beyond that, you've got things like chase sequences, which is sort of more what happens in the intro sequence of the game. This game was divided into 3 segments: the intro sequence chase, that's much more action-packed, then the more chill kind of exploration area, that station where you get to kind of experience a more kind of story beat, if you will, and where you get to kind of really explore a bit more. And then the third area, the third sort of segment that I got to pick from this menu was a combat test, where I got to partake in a combat that basically feels like 2D Arkham combat. You've got those indicators atop enemies' heads that indicate whether you should dodge, whether you should counter, and then certain enemies that are armored, you need to execute heavy attacks to make them drop their guard, so you can then finish them off with light attacks. And I think if you've played the Arkham games and are familiar with that combat, you'll be pretty at home with this. I don't get the sense that the combat will be the central sort of focus of this game. I don't foresee this being a game where you unlock tons of like skill trees and stuff like that, where you get tons of new moves. The combat is simple but engaging enough where the game, when it does kind of feature some combat, it'll offer a decent amount of challenge, and it looks pretty cool to boot because of the animations and the aesthetic of this cyberpunk 2.5D pixelated kind of vibe. That's just really cool, and mainly I'm just curious to see how the narrative of this will play out, but the presentation of this game alone is kind of really compelling, and that already draws me in. And if they can take this presentation and then add a really great plot with it, and the gameplay can be engaging enough throughout, and not just combat, but also some of those exploration elements, maybe some puzzles that I didn't get to see. There's not much in the way of puzzles so far, but I feel like I just haven't seen that much of this game. If they can have those kinds of elements in there sprinkled throughout as the narrative unfolds with this amazing presentation, I think this will be a winner. There was just something about the vibe of this game that immediately drew me in and made this one of my favorite things that I played. Next up, the new Astro Bot game. I was so pleased when the PlayStation stream that preceded Summer Game Fest announced a new Astro Bot game. This no longer feels like a PS5 DualSense tech demo. This is a full-fledged video game that is gonna probably take a lot more time to beat than sort of the couple hours that you get to spend on the more tech demo Astro Bot that we got with the PlayStation 5. This is very much like Mario Galaxy inspired is what it feels like. The levels you select are in outer space, and you've got various galaxies, and you go in there, you select planets that are essentially isolated levels and worlds, and all of them are so freaking creative and beautiful, and the gameplay variety is insane. This actually feels like it's got Nintendo levels of creativity in not just the way the levels are designed, but also the personality of the enemies and boss fights. And boss fights are really cool in this game. I feel there's this one, his name is Wako Taco, and it's this boxing octopus and uses his fists or his tentacles to punch, and every level has like a gimmick item that you can activate, and so far every single level has had a different one, so it's just like a new gameplay element in every level. In the Wako Taco level, for example, you essentially had the equivalent of Nintendo's arms, where you could stretch your arms and grab onto things, and you could also punch things that way at a distance, and you could also grab things and slingshot yourself. And slingshotting yourself was a big mechanic of this boss battle, where you would punch away at the boxing gloves, and then you would like grab onto some of the tentacles, you would slingshot yourself into its eye, and rinse and repeat. And then there were multiple stages. There was eventually like a platforming segment before you would reach the boss again, and there'd be one last showdown. And it had this like epic feel to it that was very like lighthearted and family friendly and funny, but also really charming. So the Astro Bot, man, I'm telling you, this is going to be a huge hit. I think this is going to really bring Astro Bot into the forefront and into the spotlight. And I think this is going to be PlayStation's Mario. I've only explored like some levels of the first Galaxy. There's like tons and tons of levels is what it feels like. So this is going to be a full-fledged thing, and I think this is going to be special. I have a really, really good feeling about Astro Bot. Next up, I played some Devolver Digital games that were at Summer Game Fest. Devolver Digital is like one of my favorite publishers right now. The kinds of indie games that they support and help output, and how just creative they are. These three games, Skate Story, Neva, and the Plucky Squire, is just more evidence of that. Skate Story is this visually mesmerizing experience. It's like inspired by Dante's Inferno, except you're skateboarding through the underworld, and so the visual aesthetic of this is insane. And it's all about essentially this visual journey, but also has some puzzle elements, and all of it involves skateboarding and going from point of interest to point of interest. But then you have these on-rail sections, and along the way you're also learning tricks that the game slowly introduces you, and those are, it takes a little getting used to the control scheme, where the trigger and shoulder buttons are the positioning of your foot, and based on which of those buttons you're holding down, when you jump, you'll perform different tricks. I think the aesthetic and its sort of abstract narrative is going to be the thing that's going to really draw you in, combined with the fact that, yeah, it takes inspiration from, like Tony Hawk, Pro Skater. It's got that gameplay, but with the kind of artistry you can expect from something like Sayonara Wild Hearts is a bit of what this reminds me of, but a lot sort of darker, but also with a sense of humor, with more sort of open area elements, where not only you can do those skateboard tricks, but you also have to solve some puzzles and partake in some gameplay that is a little more open-ended and or requires you kind of explore and think more. There's even a shop in the game where you can shop for skateboard parts and customize your skateboard, which will also change how it handles. So there's definitely depth to the gameplay here, on top of the fact that it's also taking you on this really kind of mesmerizing journey, and this is just a vibe. Helped by the fact that the music in this game is an absolute bop. Again, Sayonara Wild Hearts comes to mind a little bit. Very electronic-y, very just like getting you in this ethereal mood, if you will. The music in this game, without a doubt, is another central aspect of this experience. And if you're into electronic music like I am, like, damn, yeah, this is, you're gonna like this quite a bit. Then you've got Neva, which is from the same developers of Grease. Their art style is so unique and distinct and just so freaking beautiful and mesmerizing. And you can already tell that this story is definitely going to be emotionally charged. And it's also aesthetically just going to be something that is going to be really special. There's going to be nothing quite like this. Neva focuses a lot on like taking care of a dog that will essentially grow over time and in turn contribute more to gameplay as the story and the campaign progresses. A lot of what you'll be doing in this game is platforming, environmental puzzles, as well as some combat. Nothing overly complex, like the mechanics are all very simple, but they layer on new kind of complexities and new elements that take these simple mechanics and these simple puzzles and make them more engaging as the game goes along. And they make some of these puzzles, like they slowly teach you the basics of these puzzles, and then they kind of layer on top of that more elements that make the puzzles more complicated. And I found this great balance of this being like a great narrative and visual experience, but also offering enough engaging gameplay where it didn't just feel like an artsy walking simulator in a 2D plane or whatever. This feels like a game you're constantly playing. And what's really special about this game is how well it does at making you constantly worried about this dog that you have, who starts out as a puppy essentially, and it's doing, just puppy things, running off on its own. And there's essentially like a Neva button to call Neva or to pet Neva, and sometimes the dog's scared to kind of jump through platforms, or sometimes it runs off and you have to call to Neva, or you're worried about Neva, and so you have to like run ahead and hope that nothing has happened to the dog. And there's this constant sense of like, I must protect this precious dog at all costs. But it doesn't go so far into that it gets annoying to like constantly have to protect the dog. It does it just enough where you're concerned while making that engaging without it becoming annoying and a constant distraction. And they found a great balance there. You can tell that the heart of this game is the main character and the dog. And so having that dynamic, I think, is really, really a really smart move in the way that's executed on. Just the love that you feel for the dog because of just all these little adorable moments that the dog has, combined with the fact that over time the dog will contribute to combat and gameplay more and more, to not only add to the gameplay complexities, but to also make you more emotionally invested in the dog while the story plays out, and while you essentially grow to love the dog more and more, which might make you more invested in the narrative and what may potentially befall to the dog. I don't know, it's like that dynamic is really well captured and really well done. From what I've been told, Neva will be about a 5-hour long experience. So it's very self-contained and very kind of no fat at all. Grease was like a 3-hour thing. Neva's a little longer than that. And I think it's okay to have some games that are just short, brief experiences that you can do in like one night or one afternoon, as long as it's priced correctly. Next up, we got the Plucky Squire, which is this really interesting video game that almost feels like it took inspiration from Link Between Worlds, where there's this interaction with the 2D and 3D plane. So it's this picture book that you play through in this kind of very top-down Zelda format that's a little more linear, and there's puzzle solving and combat and all these things, but you can at points pop out of the picture book, and through that combination of the 2D and 3D plane, you are solving puzzles in really clever ways. But the picture book is also on top of this desk, and there's all this other stuff on this desk that you can, in the 3D plane, interact with, and there's this great level of interaction between the desk world and the picture book world, where things that you solve in the picture book 2D world allow you to progress through puzzles that are specific to the 3D desk world, where there might be an obstacle in the picture book 2D world that requires some kind of item that you need to take from the 3D desk world, and on that 3D desk you have to solve some puzzles to get that item that you can bring into the picture book or that you can use on the picture book. So for example, there was this stamp that I could use to essentially stop certain traps and certain obstacles, and within the 3D desk world you'll have all these objects like a cup with some kind of 2D image on the surface area, and so you can go into the 2D world of the cup and go around it and interact with that and interact with characters there, and then go to all of these different places within the desk aside from the picture book that also allow you to go in their 2D worlds and interact with them. And then there's like one cup where when you go into, there's this mini game, and suddenly the game turns into like a 2D side-scrolling shoot 'em up. So the infusion of different genres that all of these different little mini worlds that you'll find within objects scattered throughout the 3D desk world, all of that stuff really compelling. And when you solve puzzles there, you'll get key items that will allow you to use on stuff that happens in the picture book, that will allow you to take down obstacles or solve certain puzzles that will allow you to progress further into the picture book. It's just such a clever and smart and compelling and really just charming and fun game with, again, one of those ideas that feels like a passion project. It's just like overflowing with creativity. I feel like the Plucky Squire is definitely one to look out for. Next up, we got Fatal Fury. It's cool to see the return of this fighting game series starring Terry Bogard, who is pretty iconic in the fighting game realm. Now, I'll be honest, I am not a huge fighting game guru, so I'm not the one you should go to in terms of explanations for all of the mechanics involving this game, but there are a lot of mechanics, all these different bars that you have to manage that are both offensive and defensive. One particular one that I think is really interesting is the FPG, or Selective Potential Gear bar, that is situated on your health bar. And basically you can choose whether you want to have that at the beginning, middle, or end of your life, and based on where your health points are sitting, you have the capability to take advantage of the Selective Potential Gear, which makes you more powerful, and certain characters are better suited for different positions of FPG than others. And so this is a lot to wrap your head around, but at the same time, it feels like one of those things that's not too hard to learn. It's one of those like simple to get into but hard to master styles of games. And so just like playing and messing around with some of the characters, the game just played really well, and it felt really fluid, and the moves would pop off really well if you knew the inputs. And I think visually, this game, the art style that it's going for, how stylized it is, I think it's quite beautiful and striking in motion. And I get the sense that if they can just like flesh this game out with a great campaign and a lot of modes and really have a lot of content at launch, this could be, you know, as good and potentially as compelling and as attention-pulling as, say, Street Fighter 6, which did really well at launch and which I myself reviewed and thought was just a really great game. Hyper Light Breaker. The best way I can describe this is a Zelda Breath of the Wild style roguelite, where you have this hub world, which is where you're going to be essentially upgrading your stuff. But then once you go into the game proper, the game essentially procedurally generates an open world, and you've got all these points of interest where you can collect currency, where you can collect upgrades and items that will allow you to get stronger. And eventually you have to go towards a boss. That boss is going to be pretty tough, so you want to constantly explore the open world and find ways to upgrade yourself, so that by the time you fight the boss, you're ready and are able to hold your own. You can die 5 times within a procedurally open world before that world goes away and a new one is procedurally generated. So you want to use those 5 lives carefully and want to make sure that you pace yourself in a way where you can be powerful enough to face those bosses and then attain great rewards they can take back home, and then upgrade your character further to go into new procedurally generated worlds, and that process essentially just rinse and repeats. It's just this really cool gameplay loop, and the way they capture sort of that Breath of the Wild-esque sense of kind of go anywhere and you know, look at the map and see what's around. You have a combination of melee weapons and range weapons, and those get upgraded. I happen to get very lucky with the demo's draw of weapons and upgrades, so I actually breezed through the demo, but I did get to see the map and just how much stuff there was in the open world, how much you can explore, and how much you can, you know, kill ads that are out in the open world to be rewarded with items and with upgrades, and it just feels like a cool concept for a roguelite. You just got to make sure that the progression loop just constantly feels like there's a forward momentum, and that the variety of upgrades and items and equipment and weapons, you name it, all of that stuff, there's enough of it where it can really last you for a while, and you can feel like you can just play this game forever. And the build variety and all these things, obviously that's all the elements that you can't see in just like an hour-long demo. But if that stuff's fully fleshed out, then the core fundamentals of this roguelite, I think, are really solid and really addictive. So I'm really digging Hyper Light Breaker so far. Moving on, I want to talk about Lego Horizon, which PlayStation allowed me to play a little bit of. It's a Lego game, so, you know, there's not much else to say except that it's just kind of turn off your brain, dumb, simple fun. The mechanics are very simple. It's very easy to figure out the controls. You've got like a jump button, an attack button. There's a button to focus and scan the area around you and the enemies around you. There's an interaction button, and that's like all you gotta know. The combat is very simple. You've got a ranged weapon as well as pickups that are essentially consumables that are powerful to use, and you use your focus to see what weak points the enemies have, and you try to focus on hitting those weak points, those parts that you can scan, kind of like in Horizon, the original game, but a much more simplified version. And when you hit those weak points, you deal a lot more damage. You've got some simple puzzles like shooting arrows through fire and then onto plants and vines that maybe are blocking a climbable element. The characters are very silly and in a much better mood than the broodier Horizon video games proper. The dialogue and the humor is just very silly. No aspect of this game takes itself seriously in any way, shape, or form. And because it's set in the Lego world, they really let you play around with cosmetics, both for your character, but also like the buildings in certain villages and hubs. You can really just go all crazy with customizing all these elements with stuff from all these other Lego IPs. There was a fun little boss battle at the end that offered some nice little bits of spectacle, but again, it's all very easy, very simple, very lighthearted. There's co-op in this game as well, so the goal is to encourage couch play co-op. That doesn't stress you out all that much. You can play with your friends near you just for like a relaxing night of gaming. Or if you want to play with like your kids, this is a very accessible game. That's kind of what the focus of this experience is. It's a Lego game. Like I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, among the more interesting games that I got to play is one from Capcom called Kunitsu-Gami. I feel like graphically, it seems like it uses the Monster Hunter Rise kind of version of the RE engine. Visually kind of has that aesthetic. And so this, I guess this is like a tower defense style game where the tower that you're defending is actually the princess, and she's sort of slowly moving along and trying to like bless an area and exorcise it from demons essentially. But as you do so, there's this day and night cycle. During the day, you make preparations, you essentially collect resources around you to be able to convert the villagers around the area into units, and you place those units in specific parts of the map to protect the princess for when nighttime falls. At nighttime, enemies will start to appear, and there's this real-time combat that you can engage in, but at the same time, you're kind of commanding the units that you've accrued, and then you kind of rinse and repeat. And then once your princess manages to slowly kind of bless the area around and get to like a gate and completely eradicate the evil there, you've beat the particular level and mission, and then you get to go back to this essentially camp area where you get to enact more sort of permanent upgrades and upgrade your units and build up your arsenal. And then you kind of move from level to level in that same format of tower defense. There's some boss battles that you can partake in that will require more sort of methodical strategies of placing units and tower defense strategies. And as you progress through the campaign, you unlock new unit types, and then, of course, new enemy types will be introduced that will force you to strategize further in terms of what kinds of units you want to place where. It's a very interesting game, actually. Like, I found myself, like, really intrigued by this one, and I got to play quite a bit of it. I feel like the core fundamentals of the game are really sound. It's just a matter of, like, how compelling this is for hours on end and how the progression system of the game will keep me engaged. But this is just one of those games that are, like, super out there, and I've not seen anything quite like this. So this is definitely one that I'm, like, keeping an eye peeled for. Moving on, we got this indie game called Death Sprint 66. The best way I can describe this is violent Wipeout, except you're not a vehicle, you are a character who is sprinting through tracks, and this is just really wild fun, just very short burst races, very quick laps. You've got various items that you can deploy against opponents, you know, whether it's equivalent of red shells or defensive elements, mines, you name it. And the speed reminds me of something like Wipeout or F-Zero even, but with the violence of something like The Boys, and all of the tracks, have, death traps and pitfalls, and you've also got Mario Kart style drifting and the like. So it's a combination of all of these different racing games, but I'd say Wipeout is the closest, like a violent version of Wipeout is the closest way I can describe this game in terms of how it overall feels. I do hope that there are some bigger, longer tracks. The one that I played was, like, it was almost too brief, and I hope there are ones that do take a while where every lap feels substantial. The laps just went by so quickly, and the loops felt very small, is the one thing that I'm hoping for. But I think fundamentally, though, there's something really cool here, and if they can just, like, flesh this thing out mechanically and offer some great unlockables along the way, whether it's cosmetics or new types of playable characters and the like with different capabilities, this could be a fun one. From there, let's talk about Battle Aces. This is a cool little RTS whose intent is to streamline the RTS experience and make RTSs more acceptable. So, just to paint a picture, matches for Battle Aces are only up to 10 minutes. They have a maximum time limit of 10 minutes. The best way to describe Battle Aces is what Marvel Snap is to card games like Hearthstone is what Battle Aces is to RTSs. It's very short bursts, very, like, simplified, but still strategically sound RTS. So, for example, units spawn instantly. Base expansions, you don't need to send a unit to expand bases. You can just use shortcut buttons and base expansions begin happening instantaneously. You do have to wait a little bit of time for those base expansions to be populated with units that collect resources, but you don't have to assign units to collect resources. There's so much stuff that is automated and instant, and so the focus on this game is how you use your units and also how you build your deck of units. You can have up to 8 units total, but there are over 40 units to essentially fill out those 8 unit slots with, and those 8 slots are comprised of initial units that you have from the outset, and then there are essentially 2 unit focused buildings that you can upgrade, which unlocks your ability to use one of the more powerful of the 8 units that you have assigned from the 40 that you can build your unit deck from. So the fact that you are only limited to 8 units and you have 40 from which to choose from, and everyone is basically going to have their own unit decks, is going to pave the road to essentially gameplay where everyone's going to have their own gameplay style, and you're going to have to build multiple decks to adapt. And just the fast-paced nature of this particular RTS was just something that's really welcome. I like that it was just all the kind of more tedious stuff was kind of put aside as more automated elements, and it's just about ensuring that you have the right synergy of units and then how you deploy those units and how you control those units. And the way you control those units, very simplified, just a handful of buttons that allow you to select all units. The shortcuts for making those units are super simple. And so it just feels very easy to control, but also you can tweak settings in such a way where you can control the units in a much more nuanced manner, like maybe you would if you're playing StarCraft and you're more of like a pro RTS player. But simplified controls of this game worked really well for the intended purposes of just making this an RTS that just about anyone can play. I was really impressed by this one and the potential and possibility of this real-time strategy game of bringing more people into the genre. Last but not least, I played Fear the Spotlight, which is this sort of N64 graphics retro survival horror game. It's got this kind of Resident Evil style tanks control, but the camera isn't fixed. You can move the camera and the player character around independently. And I don't know, the demo was so short that I didn't get to really feel the game out. I do like the aesthetic that's going for, and all I know about it so far is that you go to this high school, you sneak into it, and it's like these two girls, and they use a spirit board, and some weird phenomena shit starts to happen, and there's some visually interesting stuff, and there's a neat little setup here, but I don't know how the rest of the game will play out. But it's got the kind of Resident Evil, old school Resident Evil style puzzling where you gotta investigate and look at all the items and find, keys and stuff that will allow you to unlock things, that will allow you to find objects that you can then use to progress further and take down obstacles or open doors. It feels like an old school Resident Evil game, but with a high school setting and with much more sort of paranormal elements in terms of its aesthetic and genre and setting. Cool little thing. I didn't mind what I played. I would like to see more of it. So those are the games that I played. Now for the games that I watched, let's start with Monster Hunter Wilds. So I got to see like an hour-long demo with one of the developers playing the game proper. As someone who really got into Monster Hunter after Worlds and Rise, Wilds is looking easily like the best Monster Hunter yet. People are immediately blown away by the 3D map that this game has. It's almost like Metroid Prime-esque. It felt really well laid out and like easy enough to read. And the thing that really blew me away is just the fact that everything in Monster Hunter Wilds is completely seamless. Usually with Monster Hunter, there's a separation between like the village you go back to get ready for hunts, and then you load into the wilds proper where you hunt the monsters. Not in Monster Hunter Wilds. You can walk directly into a village and right out into the open world. Everything is fully connected. It just feels like the natural next step into kind of taking the Monster Hunter formula and modernizing it. Just zero loading screens whatsoever. It's all just there, and it just makes everything feel that much more immersive. But yeah, they showed elements like how you can create mobile camps. You've got the same Firefly's guidance system that Worlds introduced. You can now cook meat with cheese and, combine different ingredients for cooking. And then for the hunts proper, the developer went after Doshaguma, which is this giant bear, and he lured it into environmental hazards and, took it into caves where there were stalactites that he would hit to drop rocks onto the monster, and then eventually he lured the monster into another monster called Balahara, which ensnared this bear-like entity, and you could just see this epic kaiju battle between these two monsters. And this is in past games, but it's cool to see new monsters going at each other and all the cool animations that play there. Balahara is more of like a snake-like entity, so it was like watching a giant snake-like creature and a giant bear basically wrestling and going at each other. It was just freaking epic. At one point, there was a giant sandstorm that kicked in the middle of the hunt, and just seeing the sandstorm coming in from the distance, it was like that scene in Mad Max Fury Road when they're like driving into the sandstorm, and once they do, it's just like freaking like the whole environment and the vibe changes. It was dark and hard to see, just windy, obviously, but also like tons of lightning striking down within that sandstorm. It was just awesome, beautiful, epic. Combat looks both familiar but refined, and they've clearly made some changes and added some stuff. At one point, they called in 3 AI companions, and they joined in, but obviously in the final game, you can call in companions in real life and play online multiplayer. And then eventually, they run into this new winged alpha monster with like lightning breath. It was very kind of Rathalos-esque, and so suddenly, the bear being lured into that, you would see another big kaiju battle between the bear and this other creature, this other monster. And I mean, just the whole demo was really thrilling and exhilarating, and it embodied everything that I wanted out of the next generation Monster Hunter Worlds sequel and entry. And then last but not least, we have Dragon Age Veilguard. I made a video about Dragon Age Veilguard and this demo. Check that out. That kind of has all the information you need, but basically I watched an hour-long version of the 20-minute video that they released publicly. And a lot of what was in that video was shown in the hour-long presentation behind closed doors that I saw, except I got to see things like the character creator, which looks very comprehensive, and I got to see more of sort of those moments in between, more kind of live gameplay, if you will. There was a developer actually playing the game from what I could tell, and so I could see more of some of the dialogue choices and more aspects of this particular intro level. And, you know, what I said in my video still stands. I think the production value of this game definitely looks great. I think the graphics look, you know, really cool. And I think the Frostbite engine is doing some great work here. But at the same time, in terms of, like, does this feel like Dragon Age? It feels like they went the Mass Effect route. This feels like fantasy and Mass Effect in terms of how the gameplay works, in terms of the fact that it's not fully open world, but it's, you know, you go from level to level. There are explorable areas, but it's not a fully open world experience. And so it just feels like the Mass Effect-fication of Dragon Age, which I'm not saying that's necessarily going to be a bad thing or that that's going to immediately make this a bad game. But, you know, Dragon Age Origin is what I consider to be peak Dragon Age. Like, it's the thing that made me fall in love with Dragon Age, and it feels like this is definitely not going to be that. Even the way you control your companions, you can only have 2 other companions, and you have this essentially abilities wheel that's very, again, Mass Effect-esque, and you know, it's no longer that kind of a tactician style view, you know, bird's eye view, where you can play this game almost like you're playing a game of chess and you're controlling every unit individually. And you know, I'm gonna have to play the final game to really judge. But in terms of just visual spectacle and whatnot, you know, I think it's clear that this is gonna be a very high production value game, and on that front, it looks cool. But you know, I don't know. I've just, when it comes to BioWare these days, I'm always skeptical, because their past 2 entries, Anthem and Mass Effect Andromeda, we all know what happened there, and you know, marketing material for those games just didn't end up being true to what the inferior final product ended up being. So I hope that's not the case with Dragon Age Veilguard, and I hope it's every bit as good as BioWare seems to advertise this game to be. But I'm gonna have to hold out. It's hard to say without getting my hands on the game and kind of seeing more of later gameplay, if you will. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is everything that I got to play and see early at Summer Game Fest Playdays. One game that I unfortunately could not fit into my schedule was Stalker 2. I love Stalker, and I was really hoping to get my hands on that game. That was at the show floor. But one of my appointments went late, and then when I tried to play Stalker 2, unfortunately, you know, they had to move on, and so I'll report back on that hopefully at a later day if I get to play the game early. But hopefully this kind of gave you a glimpse of some of the games that are coming up and some of the stuff that you should keep your eye out for. And I hope that my summaries for some of these games were informative. And let me know in the comments below which of these games you feel interested in, which ones you would love to check out or are intrigued by and would like to keep an eye out for. Which one of these games are you most excited for? Which one of these stand out? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.